Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long day in politics today, and I must admit this week has been really tough in terms of everything that's happened in South Africa, because a lot's happened, whilst nothing's really happened, and I'll explain all of that in a second. But before I do, can I say to all of my channel members, thank you so much for being a channel member, and to show you my appreciation, at the end of June, I will be taking every person whose name is a channel member and putting it through a random selector. The first 5 people who selected off there will get a free t-shirt and mug from myself delivered to you. Now, this is a t-shirt and mug that I've designed, and it goes on the theme of the Don't Tread on Me. It's basically an anti-government slogan. And you can see a picture of the set here. Anyway, if you haven't already joined as a member of the channel, you're welcome to. The link is in the description box below, as per usual. Anyway, let's move on to the news of today. And let's start off with the first news article, which is that the DA has kicked out a CAPEXIT Party member from the council. Now, this actually became quite difficult to understand what had gone on because everybody focused on the fact that he had been kicked out of council. So I tried to figure out why he was kicked out of council. Actually, what it came down to was they were having a debate on housing in the Western Cape. And a question was asked on whether or not the housing would go through to locals or economic migrants who had been coming from the Eastern Cape. Now, the term migrants was then considered to be offensive by the EFF, the ANC, and the DA, all of whom then voted to have the individual ejected. And you can actually see the ejection occurring right here.
Remove him! Remove him!
Now, you can see that this was a forcible ejection, which does raise the relevant question of whether or not this could potentially amount to common assault. I don't know. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. In any case, became curious as to why this was allowed to occur. Obviously, the idea that you could have economic migration in the country, so if you're a South African moving from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape, that was what they called racist, and that's what they found offensive. But this idea that people had been migrating between the different provinces was not a new one. In fact, if you view this clip right here, you'll notice that Helen Zille was saying the exact same thing 2 decades ago. Have a watch.
But Zille says the province is becoming a victim of its own success by attracting migrants.
Since 2010, Speaker, inward migration has resulted in over 130,000 additional new enrolments within our education system, 80% of which were from the Eastern Cape. We have estimated that the migration of learners from the Eastern Cape over the last 5 years has cost the Western Cape an additional 1.2 billion rand. Yet this money has not been diverted from the Eastern Cape education budget, even though they now service 100,000 fewer learners in that province.
The reason this becomes important to understand is because obviously this is a CAPEXIT individual. This is an individual who says that the Western Cape should be its own country. And so to a degree, what this actually was a direct attack against the very foundation of the idea of CAPEXIT. Many individuals have commented on it and shown that it shows a degree of double standards with the DA, and many individuals have suggested that the DA had basically gone woke in the Western Cape. But I suppose from my perspective, I would say that this shows that actually the DA and the CAPEXIT Party are not aligned. That's fundamentally what the issue was. But do let me know what you think in the comment section. Moving then on to the next topic of today, and this is the topic which is ever popular at the moment of the Kill the Boer chant. Now you will know that the chant itself is currently gaining international attention, with parties such as Ben Shapiro making videos on the very topic. Now, the problem with the chant is, as you will know, the Supreme Court said that basically it wasn't hate speech. It was a how shall we say, a historical relic of apartheid. It was an anti-establishment slogan. It wasn't meant to suggest that you kill farmers or even refer to Boers as farmers, even though that's how they're referred to, and it wasn't meant to incite violence. In any case, Ernest Roots, being the super intelligent guy that he is, noted that that's exactly what the chant does. I mean, you can see right here. Now, never to be outdone in the retard department, Julius Malema says that actually the singing of the song has made him famous. Everybody, according to him, he said the EFF was dead, especially after the top brass left the party. And they were all surprised to note that he was suddenly the most famous person in the world because he was in the White House. They were discussing it. And as I've said already, Julius, this isn't the flex you think it is, my friend. It really isn't. You look like a tool. But in any case, he says that the slogan is now going to become an integral part of his 2026 election strategy, which has prompted individuals to ask Ramaphosa whether or not he will be arresting Julius, because that's ultimately the question that Donald Trump says. And he said, well, no. He says no one will be arrested for singing the song, because the song, according to him, is protected speech. He says that the song itself was determined protected speech by the constitutional case. It wasn't a constitutional case. It was a Supreme Court case, and the constitutional court said they wouldn't hear the appeal. Just to be clear on that. I know Ramaphosa is not keen on the specifics, but I am. In any case, the DA, specifically Silius Brinks, who isn't exactly in the ANC's good books for the logical reasons, has come out and said that he considers the chants to be dehumanizing and dangerous. And he says that, to be honest, we shouldn't really be singing it. And I would say, yeah, that's kind of logical. And he highlights that actually the South African Human Rights Commission also suggests it's a controversial topic. Maybe don't sing it. And there are other individuals who have suggested maybe don't sing it because it could be deemed to be really confrontational. And what I would say to that is there are a lot of individuals that recognize on the one side that it is a very controversial thing to sing. But there are those, such as Ramaphosa, when asked in the White House whether he condemned it, he said, yes, we condemn all forms of speech that constitutes violence. But this does. And then when he hit home soil, he said, but doesn't constitute violence. It's a historical struggle song. So, oh well. And this has led some individuals to say that Cyril Ramaphosa has approached the topic of the song with a forked tongue. And to a degree, he has. He told Donald Trump that he would take a strong view on anybody advocating violence, which implied that he was going to take a stand against the song, even though we all knew he wouldn't. But when he got on national soil, he basically said it wasn't his prerogative. He wasn't interested in sanctioning anybody that sang the song. So he lied, or at best, he misled the president. Now, what's also become a little bit of a dilemma for the ANC is the suggestion that the Minister of Communications and Technology, Solly, is attempting to redefine the 30% equity in the ICT sector, with the 30% equity having to go to parties from historical disadvantaged groups, specifically black people. Now, I've covered this in a video, and I've actually explained how this all works between the multinationals' requirement to give 30%, which could be done through an equity equivalent scheme, and the 30% requirement underneath the licensing criteria, which has to go to a disadvantaged historical group, and that's de facto has to go to that party. Now, if you watched that video, you would have noticed that I did suggest that you could use these EERPs, these equivalent programs, for ownership structures according to the multinational rules, but you couldn't use them for licensing. And what they were trying to do is use these EERPs for licensing. And what's become interesting is that many individuals noted this video.
The process of having low orbit satellites providing Wi-Fi and internet connectivity is known in South Africa. We've been through that. And there are quite a number of other companies, Chinese companies, European companies, and Russian companies, and many others, and local companies who are interested in getting into that space. So people tend to focus on one company only, and yet we've got a plethora of companies that would want to get into this space. This is what is good about our country. Nobody ever stands on any platform and says, I'm going to do this. This is not an emperor's land or a dictator's land where you do whatever you like. Our democracy dictates that it has to be by the will of the people, by the involvement of the people, and by their wishes. So that's precisely what is going to ensue with this.
Now, the reason that this video was important is it led many individuals to say that the actual government and the ANC weren't serious about allowing there to be these EERPs, and that what he effectively wanted to do is to freeze out Starlink and only allow foreign companies such as the Chinese or the Russians. And to that I would say, guys, you've got this wrong. Because effectively what's actually happening here is that the ANC, specifically the ANC's top brass, are pushing against the amendment to the rules. They say it's deeply anti-constitutional and racist to suggest that maybe you would give it through an equity equivalence. But what Ronald Boers is actually saying is that if we do this, it actually allows trade, not just from Elon, but there could be trade coming in from China, from Russia, and from other countries that would want to invest in South Africa because it could now use the EERPs. They didn't just have to give it to local ownership. And to a degree, it's kind of correct. But in any case, it's also important to note that at the moment, no trade deal has actually been reached with the US. I mean, obviously they went over there was a suggestion that they would do things to avoid tariffs. And at the end of the day, the deadline to reach a trade agreement just hasn't happened. There is no deadline. As we know in South Africa, everything's done on African time. Nothing's done urgently. And the problem is that the timescales are starting to wane. But there is actually no negotiation going on between the US and South Africa. And according to some, South Africa just doesn't really mean enough to Donald Trump for him to actually pit all of his resources into securing a trade deal. And if you observe it just logically, the ANC is useless and inept and never does anything with any form of speed, so they're not giving this their priority. So what does that actually mean in totality? Well, it means if you remember at the actual meeting, the trade union representative, the CAPEXIT leader, said that there were 600 companies in South Africa with 500,000 jobs, and if Donald Trump's 30% tariffs actually come into effect in South Africa, all those jobs could be called into question. And it's nice to see that the ANC has taken the threat of losing 500,000 jobs seriously, because they're doing nothing apart from messing around with Kill the Boer chants, not really doing the whole BE thing properly, and still just doubling down on their actual BE employment efforts. Which actually brings me on to the next topic, which is BEE. Because according to this video, the government have known for a long time that BEE doesn't work. Have a watch.
I was asked by government to do a report, an assessment of BEE. So 2009, it was very, very clear that BEE only benefits a very, very small people, politically connected, linked to the ANC, linked to the trade unions, and so on. In the countries where empowerment works, and it really works stunningly, empowerment focused on empowering the widest number of people in the country. And our empowerment empowers the smallest number of people. If we would calculate how much money has been moved in terms of empowerment, we're talking it's close to or over 1 trillion. And I'm very, very conservative. If you take it, from the first in the early 90s. So over R1 trillion has been transferred. And sadly, it's been transferred possibly to under 100 people. And the same people has been recycled and re-empowered over and over. The same people get re-empowered. So the same people from company to company.
Now, the reason that this video itself is actually important is that one of the things raised during the Zondo Commission was that actually BEE didn't enrich South Africans. It only enriched a very small amount of people. And this has been well known for a very long time. In fact, it only ever enriches a certain political elite, something that we all talk about all the time. And why that's interesting is because, as you can see in the latest news, in Johannesburg, a tender worth 1 billion rand went to Councillor, who gets all the tenders. Who knew It's almost like that clip was correct, right? But we all knew this. Now, the DA says that they are actually going to take the entire thing under review. They say they want an independent review of the BBBEE legislation with a view to scrapping it. And they say that they're pushing this forward underneath the guise that all it's actually done is enriched certain tycoons, people who weren't disadvantaged, and that the actual transformation that's supposed to be occurring via the BBBEE scheme is a scam. It's a form of cadre enrichment, which according to everything we've just looked at, well, it is. So Godspeed, DA, but I doubt this is going to go anywhere, because as we saw the other day when Corne Mulder asked when does this all get scrapped, there's very little appetite from that from the president. Maybe once he goes, Patrice Motsepe comes in, maybe then it will get reviewed up. I don't know, let me know what you think in the comments. But you see, at the moment, it's also important to recognize that a lot of the BEE legislation isn't actually what the real concerns are. The actual real concerns come in the form of the licensing criteria, which Sargeliga effectively calls third wave BEE. In fact, Sargeliga had a nice way of explaining it. Have a watch.
Third wave of BEE is something quite different to what's come before. This wave of BEE is a direct threat to people's ability to conduct business, trade, and earn a living. We've seen this already concretely in the property sector, where the regulator has tried to tie licensing directly to BEE compliance. And we're seeing this in other sectors as well, like financial services, telecommunications, aviation, and so on. It is absolutely critical that we resist BEE with a strategy of maximum achievable non-compliance and targeted litigation.
So Sargeliga at the moment advocates that if you are a party who's going through forms of BEE criteria in terms of licensing, basically contact them. They'll show you how to try to challenge the licensing criteria around it, because in many instances, these regulatory bodies that carry the licensing objectives don't actually have the legal mandate to do what they're doing. It's all been pushed forward by a rogue regulator, if you will. And this is what Sargeliga are effectively calling third wave BEE. In any case, let's actually get on to the final news story of today. And there's really not a lot to say about this. And this is actually a story that, well, according to Gates and McKenzie, when I saw him at the BA rally, this was not a story. This could never happen. And that is a story that apparently Budget 3.0 could be in jeopardy. Because Gayton was like, nah, we've all agreed this budget's good to go. Apparently the latest news is that the EFF are taking the budget to court because of the fuel levy hikes. So we're going to go through the news story of the new budget. Can't wait. Honestly. In any case, that's the news. Until Monday, bye.